So one of the things that I've been trying to figure out, and with a bunch of our allies, some of that I've had on my show, I've been saying I'm finding it a lot easier right now to build bridges with people that are thought of as more traditionally on the right, because at least it's rooted in the individual, which is obviously a big part of everything you're talking about.
Yeah.
Do you see room to build anything left with what is the modern left for the most part? So, for example, they'll prop up someone like Linda Sarsour and basically not ever offer you a platform. Or even for me, I only get invited to colleges from the young Republicans and the libertarians and the freedom this and that. And I think it's probably very similar to you.
I think that your observation that people who identify as conservative in this country and ironically liberal in Europe.
Right, which is another thing, which when you have a show on the internet, then all the words get people crazy.
Yeah. So people who identify as conservative in this country, in the United States of America, they find it so much easier to see, what is unfree about so many of these non-Western cultures. I find it so much easier to talk to Tucker Carlson of Fox News about female genital mutilation, and I really appreciate his, the horrified look on his on his face, and the fact that he thinks this is a practice. He doesn't care whether it's justified in the name of culture or religion or whatever. It needs to stop.
Yeah.
And he is going to use his influence and his position to make that point. And then I look at the New York Times, one of these New York Times editors, who says, you know what, maybe we should, in order for these cultures to come or to lessen, to narrow the gap between this culture and that culture, maybe we need to stop calling it mutilation and call it a cut or whatever. And that I don't understand.
I mean, this is literal. You're not making this up. This was literally a piece that was written just in the last week
Her name
and a half
is
or so.
escaping me.
Yeah.
But when I look at that kind of reasoning, that kind of logic, and I look, here is a free woman. She calls herself a liberal. She is with probably the most powerful newspaper in the United States of America. Has all this influence. Why on earth is she making this terrible trade-off? And the trade-off is this: is it the individual who's actually going through the mutilation or potentially may go through the mutilation, and that individual is a child, 4, 5, 6 years old, 7 years old, sometimes younger. Some cultures, they start at infancy. Yeah. Versus some vague, abstract notion called culture, or some kind of group. So people will come and present themselves, grown-ups, and say, well, if you call it mutilation, then I'm offended to my core.
Yeah. So this is what Bill Maher describes as the soft bigotry of low expectations, right? Like, we have to change all the words and never say what things exactly are because this could inflame the situation.
But that goes to your, conservatives versus liberals, and it becomes so much easier for people like me, for people who come from the countries where these terrible things take place, and it is justified in the name of culture and religion, and a combination of the two, that we think, conservatives are our friends. Yeah. Because, they may have a very passionate position on closing borders and getting illegals out and all of these things. But when it comes to honor killings, when it comes to female genital mutilation, when it comes to, if you're a gay Muslim man, just imagine what you're going through. When it comes to all these Muslim apostates, we find that conservatives in this country make it so much easier. Yeah.
I spoke at University of Arizona a couple of weeks ago, and I was saying hi to some of the kids after, and a kid came up to me, and I could see he was really nervous, and he was shaking a little bit, and he said to me that watching my show has helped him, think about some things. And then he told me, he said, I've never told anyone this, but I'm ex-Muslim. Yeah. And then he said to me, and something else, I'm also like you. Yeah. Which meant he was gay, and he couldn't really say it. And I didn't even know what to do. And he was starting to cry, and I just kind of hugged him, and I was kind of tearing up. Yeah. And I thought, this is the ultimate irony here. Yeah. Here I am with I forget, it was the Young Republicans or whatever group it was.
Yeah.
And here is where he had to come for refuge, and
Yeah.
yet they'll be slammed as the people who are racists and bigots and homophobes and all
Yeah.
that.
But ironically, again, in 2017, it's the conservatives who take very clear positions on radical Islam, on anti-Semitism, on the killing of gays. Some of them may be against gay marriage, but here we have a religion that says gays should be killed. You never come out of the closet because you risk getting killed by your own family. So in that sense, I think there is a big, shameful smear on the people who describe themselves as liberals and who make excuses for these cultures, these law expectations and the racism and bigotry of law expectations.
Yeah, so I'll put you on the spot here. If more left-wing outlets, and I said to you last night, I get the same thing. I only get invited, when I get TV things, it's only from Fox. People say, why don't you go on MSNBC and talk about this? Well, I can't bust down their door. So, but if you got more invites from the things that are thought of as liberal or left, or invited to schools or wherever else, you would do that, correct? Like,
oh, I would do that. I have a relationship with CNN. I've been on their show many times when, something happens. I write for the Daily Beast once in a while. They're not monolithic. And within every organization, there are individuals, who just, pure common sense, say these things are inhuman, these are violations of our human rights, and these things should stop. But very often I also hear, I can't say this or I can't do this because the rest of the organization doesn't want it. And they prioritize other subjects, or they let the Muslim Brotherhood front groups take the stage and sedate them basically into saying that Islam is a religion of peace and none of these things has to do with Islam, and Muslims in America are victims of Islamophobia, and this is then
yeah. I mean, I can see, as you're saying, it's so ridiculous to you that you're sort of laughing as you're saying. But so, like, when you say that, you're talking about basically a group like CARE, that every time something happens, within 10 seconds, and I'm probably giving it an extra 9 seconds, they're immediately talking about Islamophobia as opposed to the victims, or certainly not the ideology or the rest of it. And you're saying that this is part of dawah. This is part
It's part of dawah because what they have seen is there is this weakness in the West. There's a colleague of mine at Hoover, Shelby Steele, whom I really respect and admire. He calls it white guilt, and this white guilt was there before there were any Muslims in the United States of America. But organizations like the Council of American Islamic Relations, they see this and they exploit it. And sometimes they manufacture this. They talk about a backlash. No backlash ever happens. And then they start manufacturing stories. So you look at, the FBI makes these reports on hate crimes. And you see that, again, in the United States of America, unfortunately, the largest number of recorded hate crimes is against Jews. There is a little bit against Muslims, and then even some of that ends up being, manufactured. And when CARE uses cases like those, they don't tell the public, oh, but this case has been debunked. They keep using it. And the whole point is they see that people feel guilty, and it's a way of shutting people up. It's a way of stopping them from questioning. And then what you get is that people start talking about, instead of talking about it openly in open platforms, you hear people talk about it, behind closed doors and on birthdays and in scenes where you can't really have a proper debate from both sides. And that's unhealthy.
Well, it's unhealthy, but then the irony is that then a terrorist attack happens, they immediately do that, and then the only time that these networks put some of the reformers or the ex-Muslims, so Majid or you or whoever else, they only put them on right after, when the feelings are still raw. You know what I mean? We're doing this, hopefully nothing happened while we're doing this, and we'll put it out, and it'll be for people to learn. But the media now, at least cable news, is so reactive that you have these competing things that make no sense together. You have the reaction of it's Islamophobia, as I think you said in one of the things, the bodies were still warm, you know, and then, or you have the reaction of they only put you on while it's happening and it's still raw. So it's like
Yeah.
these competing forces.
Or they frame a story in such a way that, Major Nidal Malik Hassan's attack was workplace violence, or Orlando was just another gay-hating man, and it has nothing to do with what he said it
Right.
had to do,
And had he been Christian, of
Yeah.
course they would have said, if they
Yeah.
could have found the
Yeah.
most light connection to Christianity,
Yeah.
the left would have went bananas with this, and they would have
Yeah.
said, you see, the Westboro Baptist Church and the Christians are doing this.
Yeah.
But and that's what's causing the backlash, because they're going so out of they're bending over backwards,
Yeah.
and they're starting to look ridiculous.
But there is no backlash, you see.
Right.
We live in a country of about 3 million.
3 million, we got a
300
couple more.
million,
Yeah.
300 million, 325 million people. And if you look at, again, these FBI records, it's really minimal. You don't see a backlash. You see the opposite. You see people, Americans, saying, I'm going to protect my Muslim.
Yeah.
Right? You see rabbis and Christian priests and the leadership going out and organizing more interfaith, Muslims being welcomed everywhere. You don't see a backlash. They've been saying this in Europe. They've been saying there is no backlash.
Right. We see these
There's no
pictures where
Islamophobia.
they'll write something mean, and then half of them turn out to be fakes, as you said
to be
before.
fake, yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, that happens on all sides. That whole thing about the JCCs, the Jewish Community Centers, being called, it turned out to be an Israeli that was doing a Jewish Israeli.
Yeah.
So again, you can see things bad wherever they are either way.
But when something like that happens within the Jewish communities, because there are several Jewish communities, they get incensed,
Yeah.
and they stop it, and they come out and say, yes, this is one of us. This guy is one of us, and for whatever reason he's doing it, it needs to be stopped. But when you look at the Muslim leadership, have you seen anyone come out among the organized Muslim groups to say, let's stop this now?
Yeah.
This whole bogus Islamophobia charge, let's stop it. Let's do away with it.
Yeah.
You don't see that. What you see are people like Asra Nomani and the other Muslim reformers who are saying, we don't feel the backlash as Muslims. In fact, we are more scared of these organized Islamists than we are about some kind of extreme right-wing backlash that never happens.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So before we finish, I want to talk a little bit at the end about your foundation and what you're doing, because I think you're building some new things now that I think are important. And a network to stop a network, I think, is loosely what you said before, which is that's what we need. But I do want to spend a couple minutes talking about female genital mutilation, because we've mentioned it. I read your piece about it, and you described the 5 types, and it's horrific. The only reason I want to talk about it is because reading it, and even the way you wrote it, I think after the 3rd type, you said this is getting hard to read. It was hard to read from the beginning, but you said something to that effect. And really, I really was having trouble reading it. I mean, it's so viscerally awful. So we can go through all of them if you want, but we don't have to. But can you just, for a couple minutes, just lay out what's going on there? Because people are now hearing it, and you're right. When the New York Times then says, well, it's cutting.
Yeah.
And last night you described some of the other...
and some academics say this has been going on for a long time, and it must have some kind of value that we as Westerners don't understand, so we should just let it be.
Yeah. So we'll link to the article down below so people can read it, but if you want to just lay out a little bit of it.
Well, the first thing I want to point out is this is being done to children. It's being done to girls, little girls, vulnerable by people they trust, their parents, their extended family, grandmothers, aunts. A lot of women are involved in keeping this practice in place. They have their reasons for doing it. They say it's religious, it's to give the girl the opportunity for a husband in the future, whatever. So this poor little girl is really not consulted at any moment about whether she wants it or not.
Yeah.
It's harmful. And in some cases, it's so harmful and debilitating, it leads to paralysis, it leads to death. Children bleed to death. It leads, I can't even begin to talk about the psychological effects of once you realize that a part of you has to go because it's filthy. Mm-hmm. And so you have to realize that. It's happening to children. Yes, it does happen outside of the United States, and now we are seeing those cultures come here and carry on the practice.
Yeah.
We have laws here that purport to protect all children. And what you're doing by accepting this practice or turning a blind eye to it is that you're saying the United States laws that protect all girls and women do not protect these few. girls from Egypt, from Sudan, whose parents are from Egypt and Sudan, and Saudi Arabia and India or Pakistan, any of these countries where it's commonplace to cut the genitals of girls, to mutilate and to close them, the law does not protect them.
So you're quite literally saying we have laws except for the people who need those laws the most.
Yes.
I mean, it's the height of absurdity, actually.
It's the height of absurdity. Again, you go back to the bigotry. It's turning everything. If you are not a racist and you really mean it, then you should open up these laws to little girls from these cultures. With forced marriages, with honor killings, it's the same thing. If you believe that the law should protect all women to own their own bodies and to make their own choices, then the same laws should protect these girls. The girls who come to the AHA Foundation at the age of 16, 17, I'm being forced to marry. If I disagree, I'm going to be killed by my father. We can't get law enforcement to help out. We give, we teach, we train, we've created training manuals, we talk to service providers and all that. But one thing that I really think needs to become, and this is our aspiration, the aspiration of the AHA Foundation, is to make every American aware of the fact that these practices, child marriage, forced marriage, female genital mutilation, honor violence and honor killings are happening right here. And these vulnerable women are excluded. They're excluded from the laws that protect us all.
Yeah. So then I think as a perfect ending, so your foundation, you've changed around a few things. You guys are growing. I know you're doing a partnership with Faisal. For people that want to get involved. Because I do think we're getting some wins here. This type of stuff is starting to resonate. How can they get involved? I mean, of course, people can give money and help get voices out and help find some people that are in closed societies and things like that. But what else can people do?
Volunteer work. Because if you understand what the problem is and you have the time, you can help us take that awareness, volunteer your time. If you're good with social media or other ways of reaching as many people as possible, please help us out. If you are a teacher, if you are a policeman, if you are any other service provider somewhere in the country and you are confronted with any of these practices, please let us know. We are an activist group, and again, we want to shine the light on these terrible practices against women, but we also want to work with all other groups that are targeted by Sharia. We want to work with the gay community, we want to work with the Jewish communities, we want to work with the Christian communities. Nobody really in the United States, very few people, very few groups talk about what is done to Christians in the Middle East, these blasphemy laws, etc., and how this whole thing is finding its way into traditionally Christian countries.
I mean, there's almost no Christians left in the Middle East.
They've been eradicated, and even the ones that are left, and it's not just the Middle East. Think about the blasphemy laws in Pakistan. Think about what happens to Christians in Malaysia and Indonesia. None of this is really discussed in the way it should be. It should be headline news every single day, I believe, until it stops. We should be pressuring our government to tie economic, political, diplomatic, to use all of these tools as a pressure method to stop these persecutions. The mainstream media is not reporting. And once in a while, you see a report here or there, but it's not a campaign. It doesn't look like it's being taken up. And I think we should, make all of this. I'm someone who's really benefited from globalization. I am an immigrant who is really grateful to have been allowed here in the Netherlands and to have come out of this. And I think my duty, as with other successful immigrants, is to make sure that we shine a light on these atrocities.
Well, I know it truly is about being an individual because you've inspired hundreds, if not, I'm sure thousands of people, including me, that got me to have a little bravery to do what I do, and that's all we need. So it's been a pleasure. I could talk to you all day, but I know you have many more things to do today. So I thank you for coming in, and for you guys that do want to get involved, check out Ayaan's foundation. It's ahafoundation.org.